Hey guys, this video is for educational purposes only. Please do not break the law. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Growers MBA podcast. Today, I am very lucky to have Mr. Luke Burmeister, the head of sales over at Twister Technologies. Luke, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, James, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on the podcast with you guys. I know it's a long time coming. So
Yeah, we've been working on this for a while, and I'm super excited. I mean, you guys have awesome products, awesome customer service. Like, we love working with you guys. So I'm really excited to kind of educate people more about your company. I guess the first question, I'd love to just learn a bit about you. Maybe what's your background in the industry and how'd you get involved with Twister?
yeah, great question. I'm based here in Denver, Colorado. I've been working in the industry now for about 10 years, 8 years of which have been with Twister. I kind of got involved with the plant, I would say senior year of high school and then a little bit more in college, but didn't really partake in really smoking cannabis until I was about a senior in high school. I was a jock, up until then and didn't really utilize it until I needed it for, more or less of just like pain. And inflammation. At the end of the day, I played a lot of sports in high school, and instead of taking, muscle relaxers at the time, which were super easy and relatively easy to get, being 2008 and 2009, that time of year. Alternatively, I had some buddies that did smoke and kind of got me to swing over that way of doing that. Fast forward to college, I got a little bit more involved with cannabis just on a selling perspective, but that's another story here and there. But after I graduated college, I knew I wanted to move out to Colorado. At the time, my cousin just overtook our family's packaging company that was founded in the 70s. And Mitch, my cousin, being on the younger side, definitely saw a huge opening into that market. Packaging for the longest time was a kind of a pretty conservative game. Not a lot of people wanted to, go into packaging for cannabis, especially around 2013 and 2014. Colorado was one of the, the first rec market in the States. So there was a huge opening and demand for that. So I started doing, outside consulting and some sales for my family side of the business. Was able to get our foot in the door with Dixie Elixirs, Incredibles out of Boulder. That flourished into him starting a CBD company, which I did some outside sales and consulting with as well, Life Bloom Organics. And then fast forward, a couple years after that, I was doing outside sales for a facility services company. It wasn't really the most exciting work that I was really committed on. I wasn't really passionate about what I was doing, and I knew I wanted to get back into the cannabis side of the business. And there's some pluses and minuses that go with just working with your family. But ultimately, I was looking for work, and I got headhunted by Twister in 2017, and ultimately was one of the first 4 reps that they hired on for U.S. reps back in 2017. And since then, I've kind of worked my way up. I started out just doing the B2B market in Colorado, and since then I've worked my way up to have pretty much all the West Coast and leading up our sales team for Canada and the United States.
Awesome. So yeah, you've been with Twister for what? That's about 8, almost 9 years now at this point.
It'll be 8 years in January, yeah. So it's been an exciting time so far with them, and yeah, I love every bit of it. I think I'm just as enthused and passionate about what I'm doing today as the first day I worked with the company.
Awesome. And what's like kind of the history behind Twister? I mean, if they've been around, if you've been with them for 8 years, when were they even started?
Good question. And depending on who you ask, we'll get kind of a different variation of the answer, I'm sure. But we come from cultivation. We were founded in 2007 in British Columbia in Surrey. Our owner, we're a family owned business. Jay comes from cultivation. He's been cultivating for 25 plus years. So a lot of history when it comes to growing the plant and the legacy market out of BC, if you know any history about just British Columbia in general, big growing hub. But essentially, we got started and founded as a trimming company in 2007, more or less because, Jay kind of got tired of, going to Craigslist ads looking for hand trimmers to bring out to their site. And as you know, in that legacy market, you do want to try and stay under the radar as much as possible. But, part of that is, taking a risk and bringing on, new faces to an operation where it could potentially get you burned, right? So the story of how we even got our name is essentially, they would round up all these people to come out and do hand trimming for 15 or 20 bucks an hour off a Craigslist ad, and they'd have them meet them at a remote location and pick them up in an airport shuttle van with no windows. And once they got in the van, they would have, glasses with duct tape over the lenses so they couldn't see what direction they were going. And this was all the while they were basically doing a blueprint on our T2, which is our first trimmer, and looking for a name on how to basically, name the company and move forward. And one of these individuals got out of the van and he goes, "Holy crap, you guys are really taking those corners really hard, man." It was like a twister back there. And that just kind of stuck with Jay. And it was like, that's what we're going to name it. We'll just name the company Twister, or the brand Twister. The company name for us is Keirton. That's the company's name. The brand's Twister, but the brand's name came from that story. Our COO was actually at that point in time in Jay's garage working on blueprints of our T2, which is, it's our longest running trimmer that's still in the market. That's had a lot of, new designs implemented on that machine and new safety features along the way. But yeah, kind of an interesting story to how it got its name.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. I love how like old school it is too, just how you guys got started so long ago with the hand trimmers and I guess cowboys in a way back in the day, doing stuff a little bit under the radar. Yeah, I seem to hear that story a lot when talking to a lot of the brands we work with. So it's really cool. It's a fun industry to be a part of that's had such a history like that. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about your guys' product line. You mentioned the T2, which we'll get to. I know that one's a bit more expensive, but let's start off with maybe the more entry level one. The T6 trimmer, from what I understand, is pretty maybe like a home grower or a smaller grow in general. Maybe you could tell me a bit more about who this exactly is for and what are the benefits of it, and when someone should consider looking at purchasing this.
Totally. Yeah. Our T6 is, it's a tabletop trimmer. It's capable of doing wet and dry trimming. It incorporates what we like to call single piece flow. So it does incorporate a vacuum, a tumbler that's spinning, and blade on blade contact that's spinning. So it is a little bit noisy anytime that you've, worked around any kind of, a trimmer that does incorporate a vacuum. There will be a little bit of noise to that. It is versatile. It's lightweight, easy to break down. It's got a removable control box on there. It's really targeted for that person that is maybe starting up as a hobby, or they may have a tent in their basement, or even growing out their basement for that matter, if they're getting really involved in it. If it's definitely, I would say, targeted to someone that's doing, anywhere between 15 to 25 pounds a day or a harvest, that would be a good throughput number capacity on there. It's great because it is versatile. If they're wanting to do anything with fresh frozen or extraction, you can always back off the blades a little bit and just take care of that heavier fan leaf prior to doing like a fresh frozen extraction. But it works great on wet and dry as long as your room environment's on the drying room. If you're doing dry or dialed in, you're going to have good results on that trimmer. And it's easy to take care of at the end of the day. You can break down and power wash it, remove that control box. Overall, pretty versatile machine. And, if you are looking to do a handful of maybe dry trimming, wet trimming, or if you're doing extraction like fresh frozen, it's a good option there. I wouldn't necessarily put it in a commercial category, but there have been some, states like Vermont where you're dealing with, or like even in the early days in Michigan where we were getting small caregiver licenses issued out to where it did fit the needs of their capacity and their throughput requirements.
Sweet. And you guys have a couple other machines here that we can touch on as well. The T4, I believe you guys have the normal and then a T4 Pro, right? Maybe you could talk about what the difference between those versus the other machines and the difference between the T4 and the T4 Pro as well.
Yeah, definitely. T4, I would say, is probably our most known trimmer, or like most well-known, like to market trimmer for commercial facilities. It definitely fits that sweet spot when it comes to throughput or plant count. You're also able to scale the T4s like you can the T2s and daisy chain them, or we call them tandem units, where you're running them back to back with the rail system, inbound, outbound conveyor, really utilizing more or less of your throughput capacity. Where the T4 really stands out, I would say, with a lot of craft indoor producers is its versatility when it comes to having speed control with the built-in control box on that unit that's also removable. You're able to dial up or down how fast the tumbler is spinning to get the product out a little bit quicker, or leave it in there a little bit longer. Say if it's something that's heavier family, if you didn't defan properly prior to trimming. We've also got versatility on the CFM control. We have a vacuum reduction valve is what we like to call it, but you can basically reduce the suction power, how much CFM is actually hitting the the blades right below the unit. If you're trimming something that's going to be more of a candy strain or less dense, not an OG, that's delicate, maybe doesn't have as good a bud structure as a dense OG. All those variables play a huge part in getting the result that you're wanting to, not just on the quality of the trim that you're getting, but also your bud to trim ratio at the end of the day. So your yield, right? Your take home cash. The T4, super easy to break down and clean and maintain. We've made a lot of revisions to that unit over the course of its lifetime at Twister. It's definitely, I would say, still in that sweet spot. Like a lot of my guys in California that run really good craft grow operations have really good brands in the market, like Claiborne, Mojave, Maven, you name it. Those guys are running T4s at their operation, and for good reason, right? It's a reliable machine, super dependable, easy to clean, easy to maintain. And every strain, I can't stress this enough, is different from the next, right? So having those versatilities and being able to make adjustments on the fly to get the results that you're needing versus, say, loading in a bunch of product into a dry batch style trimmer and pushing start and coming back in 4 minutes. The thought philosophy around single piece flow is making those adjustments on the fly to get the results that you need. And they're good measures to have them on the spot too. You can almost form recipe books, SOPs around specific strains to get the results that you're looking to get.
So it's a pretty comprehensive machine from what I'm hearing. It's based off of like what you're looking to do. It sounds like there's a lot of options when it comes to this machine. So
there are, yeah. I mean, as far as configurations and setups go with the T4, we deal with facilities all the time that want us to basically do layout configurations to fit into a room depending on how much square footage they have. The beauty in the T4s and the T2s compared to a T6, even though you can run T6s back to back, is utilizing an inbound and outbound conveyor really speeds up the workflow. It increases the efficiency of the feeding of the trimmer, which is a big variable in getting good results when it comes to bud to trim. So setting a specific speed on the inbound conveyor prevents any kind of wave mechanisms of overloading or underloading the trimmer. You want it to be fed consistently. Overall, T4, is definitely, I would say, one of my bread and butter machines. It's for our company. It's definitely one of the top selling trimmers that we see go to market. Very popular trimmer.
And what's the big difference between the T4 and the T4 Pro?
The big difference is they're going to be the same mechanics. The only main difference is it's a fully stainless steel. So if you're looking to cultivate in a GMP environment, or if that's your target or your goal to eventually have GMP standards, stainless steel is a big part of that, not just for cleanliness, but sanitation. At the end of the day, stainless steel is just a lot easier to clean and sanitize. That's going to be the main difference between the SC model and the T4 Pro model. Is just going to be fully stainless steel.
Cool. That answers a lot of questions actually we get from customers all the time, is like, why stainless steel? What's the point? What's the benefit of stainless steel? But yeah, that's a really good answer. And that's one I'm going to let my employees know for next time, because we get that question all the time.
Throughput, capacity, shear inner mechanics, they're the exact same. It's just stainless steel at the end of the day.
Cool. Let's talk about the T2. You mentioned that earlier. That's you guys' oldest machine. Bit of a big investment for that one. So is this for kind of larger grows? What's it for?
Yeah, for sure. So our T2, like I mentioned earlier, that's our first unit we put out to market in 2007. The T2 finds its way in really a variety of different grows. We have a lot of commercial cultivations that run the T2 in indoor settings, green door for light depth settings, and even outdoor for sure. As far as quality of cut, it's very comparable to the T4. It really just kind of comes down to like your room environments prior to going into trimming. So really dialing in the dry prior to going into trimming. But the main differences on the T2 compared to the T4, I would say it's a little bit more easier to onboard employees on a T2 than it would be a T4, simply just because you don't have those variations of speed control. The blade on blade contact, or the RPMs you're getting off the motor, is set speed, and that's same to be said even for the tumbler. The main difference as far as throughput capacity is a wider and longer tumbler. Higher plant count cultivations in indoor, greenhouse, and outdoor typically will go with the T2 compared to a T4, simply just to cut down the hours needed to get through a harvest. Super easy to still break down and maintain and dial in the blades on that unit. The throughput capacity compared to, say, a T2 to a T4 on drying, your T4 is typically a conservative throughput rate on dry cannabis on that is anywhere between 10 and 12 pounds an hour versus, the T2 is anywhere between 16 and 18 pounds an hour is typically what we see, and those are conservative numbers. You still have the option to build out those T2s, run them in tandem, have inbound, outbound conveyors, and even utilize some of our other new technology on the outbound with T2s, like Marvel for grading the cannabis and sorting the cannabis afterwards.
And the T2, all the ones we've mentioned so far are hybrid trimmers as well, right? They do wet and dry.
Correct. Our T2 is right there at the T4. It's hybrid trimmer. It'll do wet trimming, dry trimming. We have a lot of companies that'll utilize it for both, especially for that fresh frozen.
Cool. And so that brings me to the next question, because you guys also have some dry batch trimmers as well. You got the Batch One Go, which is the tabletop, and then the Batch One Pro, which I guess is a bit of a bigger investment. And so I'm kind of curious, what's the difference between these, which from my understanding only focus on dry trimming, versus the hybrid trimmers? How do they work differently? Are these like really good, really, really specialized in dry trimming? What exactly is a batch trimmer? For people that aren't super familiar with it.
For sure. There's a lot of, if you look on the market, different, styles of batch style trimmers. I can name some competitors right now. Green Bros is a strictly dry only trimmer. Triminator, which is made by Mobius, strictly only dry trimmer. The benefits of that, they share their purpose and value in certain, situations or certain commercial settings, or even the indoor guy that's maybe growing in his basement. But I guess I'll start with like the Batch One Go. I mean, the big one for me is noise, and that's the big one usually for a lot of people too, is you're not incorporating a vacuum. It's essentially a tumble method with a saddle, is what we like to call is the blade mechanism that will hug that tumbler as it's spinning. It doesn't necessarily touch the tumbler, but it gets very close enough to where it's taking care of any of that fan leaf or sugar leaf. So noise variability, you're able to trim, and it's not loud at all. The Batch One Go is a tabletop trimmer. You're able to get, roughly about 2 to 3 pounds an hour on dry trimming with that unit, with very minimal touch up at the end of the day. It's easy to clean. All the trim and keef basically gets collected right below it in a bin that goes in and out of the trimmer. Ultimately, that's a really hot item for a lot of indoor, tent growers at home. The big brother of that model, the Batch One Pro, we designed for commercial facilities to compete up against the Triminator model. And with us, the innovators that we are, we saw some flaws that we could definitely improve, some bottlenecks that we could solve with that machine. And even maintaining that machine was a big one too. So with the T0 Pro and the Batch One Go, like a lot of our units, the control box, the brain of the unit that does all the power movements on the equipment, is easily able to remove, unlike a lot of other units that everything's compact. So you're able to power wash and deep clean the machine at the end of the harvest, which is a big one. Another one with that being able to be attached is being able to fit it through a standard door, which we found like, at a lot of facilities that we would go to, that unit would stay in 1 or 2 rooms just because it was a pain in the ass to move it around. The Batch One Pro, we designed a bigger tumbler to have a more throughput capacity per hour, and a detachable control box on the unit to actually move it, say, from a stationary room designated for trimming to another room that was designated for cleaning. The Pro, your throughput capacity, your sweet spot, I say, for loading is about 8 pounds in. You definitely want to make sure that the water activity in the flower is where it needs to be. Like the characteristics you're looking for is, squishy, almost like a marshmallow on the outside. The sugar leaves are crispy and the stems are not snapping. They're a little bit pliable. They almost want to snap on you. That's what we recommend pretty much for any of our trimmers, regardless if it's a strictly batch style trimmer or a single piece flow, like a T4, T6, T2. But those are the batch style trimmers that we have. I find, the biggest difference between like a T4, T2 compared to like a Batch One Pro is really having those versatility of making adjustments on the fly, right? Like if I'm loading in 8 pounds at a time, and I'm not maybe dialed in on my dry like I wanted it, there's versatility that I can do and adjustments I can make on a T4 or a T2, whether that's, adjusting the pitch or the angle of the machine, the slope to get the product out quicker, blade on blade contact, CFM, those variables I can do on the fly and get the result that I want. And if I risk it, I'm only risking, a fraction of a pound to dial in that machine versus, now I'm dealt with this product coming out of the dry room. I'm gonna have to load 8 pounds of it in here. I'm gonna push start and play, but I've really got to eye that. And if it's not where it needs to be on the water activity of the flower, you're kind of set with just how tight I can get that saddle going. So for me, when I'm talking with commercial producers, especially, I really try and push hard on having those variables and being able to make those changes on the fly to get the results that you want. And it does get back to, the conversations we had earlier about just how specific different genetics and strains are coming out of dry.
Hey guys, quick interruption here. I just want to let you know that every single product mentioned on this episode is available for sale at greenthumbdepot.com. We love hearing from growers just like you. So if you mention that you heard about us on this episode, we might even be able to throw in a bit of a discount. You can shoot me a personal email at james@greenthumbdepot.com or give us a call at 833-416-0375. We have the best prices on the internet and the best customer service. Not to mention, we offer free shipping across the continental US with no sales tax outside of Nevada. All right, let's get back to the episode. Cool. It sounds like you guys really pay attention to like even the small intricacies of what the growers need. I think that's really cool what you guys built to make sure it can go through doors. I mean, you wouldn't really think that would be such an important thing, but I'm sure that's super convenient for a lot of grows. That might even be a huge selling point for a lot of grows.
Versatility is everything, right?
Yeah. So just a couple more of your guys' product line I wanted to go over. The bucking machines, and then I want to touch on your T0, which is obviously a massive machine. But let's just touch on the bucking machines really quickly. For people who aren't super familiar, what is the difference between a bucking machine and a trimmer? And, maybe you could talk a little bit about why the B4 bucker is something that growers should consider putting into their lineup.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up bucking. It's still considered to be a huge bottleneck in today's industry, even at a commercial standpoint. We see a lot of companies that will continue to do it by hand, and it does serve its purpose to continue to buck by hand in some commercial facilities. We do have a bucker. It's called the B4. It's been out for probably 6 or 7 years now. The main differences I would say are highlights features to ours compared to, a Munch machine or a Mobius bucker is going to be one, like horsepower. We have a pretty industrial built 1 horsepower motor on our bucker. So it's made to and built to be ran for a long period of time. Another key feature is just the quick release valve for the cartridge on the bucker. So just like wet trimming, if you're bucking even wet or dry, it's a pretty dirty job over a long course of hours, especially if you have a high plant count. So the versatility in having a disposable cartridge is you're able to quick release that, take it off, and put on another one in about 10 seconds and get right back to work. So there's not really any downtime to cleaning versus a lot of the buckers on the market right now are stationary, meaning that, if it's getting gunked up, you're going to have to unplug that unit and take off the faceplate, do a deep clean, put it back on, plug it back in, and get back to work. So we take away the downtime of cleaning on the B4 bucker. The biggest one I would say right now, the design setup of ours is very similar to what you would find in a Munch machine or a Mobius or Centuron is, 2 rollers that sit very close to one another. Some of our competitors touch each other, which gets them gunked up a little bit more. Some of them are like our design where you have 2 spring-loaded shocks that absorb any kind of friction when a plant stalk goes through. That longevity increases and you're able to go for a little bit longer period of time. But really, we've not dug in a whole lot on implementing a new design for a bucker. It's definitely one of those things in the works, but I personally recommend, even though we design and sell a bucker, if you're doing anything craft or indoor and you're looking at automating that process or how can we save like labor hours, but you're maybe not utilizing our technology on the trimming side yet, or even on the curing side yet, stick with doing bucking manually. I recommend that just because I almost like compare it to like baking, right? There's a lot of different steps that go into baking a cake or doing sourdough bread that you can screw up like that if you don't stick to the recipe, or if the room environment, the RH and the temp isn't accurate, or if the yeast isn't, where it needs to be prior to baking, it can get screwed up. And with us, I think the biggest difference is we're able to actually honestly admit that to people and say, hey, doing it by hand right now might be costing you guys, an arm and a leg when it comes to the labor, but there's other areas of your process that we can save that money and still increase the quality. So with bucking, things that come to risk when you're doing that is obviously your crowns of the plant. You typically, even in a B4 bucker, if you're safe for doing dry, you'll see some poppage. Even in competitors' buckers, you will too. Where by poppage, I mean like a crown of an A might turn into a B and 2 Cs. And eventually what you're doing is degrading the quality of the plant, and you're also degrading like your ultimate yield, right? Anytime you break down a cola and you're automating that process, you're running a risk, or even doing it by hand, you're adding more steps that it potentially is going to decrease your yield or your take home weight at the end of the day. So majority of my customers, especially West Coast guys, are still doing that by hand. And that's most importantly just to preserve the quality of the flower. Room environment plays a huge factor when you're doing that. Same thing with, the drying room all the way to cure. That's where we typically hit hard on when it comes to process flow is the environments at the end of the day.
Sweet, yeah, and I really appreciate the honesty behind it all, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that honesty. That sounds like you're really like focused on helping them to make sure they have the most successful grow possible. And it is true. I mean, if they bought something, they don't really know what they're doing. For some of these grows, it costs them a lot of money. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Let's touch on the T0 Pro. This is a massive, expensive machine, really, really intense machine. What could you touch on for this? Who exactly is this machine for?
First of all, I'd say, there's nothing like it on the market as far as if you look at, Mobius 108s or Centurions, large industrial trimmer, Toms. What we've designed and the energy and effort and time that we've put in designing this trimming system is untouched. It's in a different ballpark compared to anything on the market. Is it for big producers? Yes, but also no. Like we've had producers that are doing 600 pounds a week, which seems really high, but we have producers that do, 10,000 pounds a week that are utilizing this machine on a weekly basis, right? So the best way to describe T0 Pro is really a beefed up, juiced out T4 with just a lot of bells and whistles. So it gets back to that versatility. It gets back to safety. The T0 Pro is fully GMP compliant. It's all stainless steel. It comes with inbound and outbound conveyors. The uniqueness that stands it apart, I would say, from anything on the industry is what we call Oracle, which is a laser mass scanner that sits on the very butt end of the feed conveyor right before product gets loaded into the trimmer. And what Oracle does is it'll essentially detect how much weight's going and flowing into the trimmer. So there's no second guessing of underloading or overloading the feed conveyor. Or if you're automating product going into a loading conveyor, you might be loading on more weight in that feed conveyor than I would, and there could be peaks and valleys. This prevents it. It'll slow it down. It'll speed it up. It'll jimmy it to where it's the same consistently fed amount throughout the portion of the trimming. So a good consistently fed trimmer gets you really good results when it comes to not only the quality of the trim you're getting, but also your bud to trim ratio. So that piece of technology was added on, about 4 years back, but that's been a huge factor just in consistency and onboarding and SOPs, making it easier to train. A big one with the Pro 2 is the controls are all HMI controlled on a panel. So you're able to digitally save and store recipes. It gets back to those variables, which, single piece flow, if you're able to automate those and save and store, not just your feed rate, so how fast the product's moving in, but your tilt or pitch, how fast the product's getting out or staying in, your CFM on the vacuum. So we're able to digitally control how much suction's getting on there, your blade on blade contact, as well as how fast those tumblers are going. All those variables are able to be stored and saved on an HMI screen. After you get done dialing in your product, say for Bubba Kush or lemon cherry gelato or whatever it might be, you'll have some timing to get that dialed in. But once it is dialed in and you're getting the results you're looking at getting, you store and save that. And next time you're doing lemon cherry gelato, there's no second guessing. You just go back to the recipe and press play. All those variables in sync go back to how they were and how you saved and stored it. Another big advantage, I guess I would say, on T0 Pro is HEPA air filtrations built into the system. So we're able to integrate the HEPA filters into the HVAC of the room and recycle that air quality back in the room for the workers to have it be 99% hospital quality grade air. So if you've ever been in a commercial setting where they are running multiple lines of T2s or multiple lines of Mobius 108s or Centurions, it doesn't take anyone but 2 seconds to just take their finger and rub it on a wall and get keef build up on their wall. Or you talk to some workers that may be wearing glasses, and you can look inside the creaks of the glasses and there's keef build up, right? That's got to go somewhere, and it's not going in your pocket or your wallet at the end of the day for a yield, right? It's getting in your lungs. It's not only costing you guys probably thousands of dollars a year in lost revenue, but it's also a safety issue at the end of the day. So that's something that we definitely looked at, a problem in the industry. How can we solve this T0 definitely takes care of that. Now when we get to talking about throughput capacities on that system, a conservative number is 125 pounds an hour throughput dry. A conservative number for wet harvesting is, upwards of 500 pounds an hour. And if they're strictly just doing, fresh frozen and wanting to remove heavy plant leaf on wet material, we have customers that run both the T0 Pro and the SE of upwards of, 900, 1,000 pounds an hour. Even dry customers of ours in Canada and the United States that are indoor facilities or greenhouse facilities have got numbers and dry trimming of up to 175 pounds an hour and processing rate. We talk about price point with this unit. It's definitely upwards of 500,000 to sometimes 700,000 if you're integrating Marvel onto that system, which is our artificial intelligent grading system. But usually what we do is do a very thorough, intricate ROI when it comes to hours needed to get through their harvest, head count. A big one's yield, like looking at how much we can save you in overall yield, backing it into a performance guarantee, which is basically a money back guarantee. And then really the most important one is showing their buyback period on the equipment. And we do this not just for T0 Pros, but also for T4s and T2s, is really showing them, hey, this is an expensive piece of equipment, but I'm going to show you how soon it's going to take for it to pay for itself, and then how soon you're going to be actually saving that money from there on out. And in cannabis, you ask any commercial producer how quickly they want their buyback to be, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear yesterday, right? They want it relatively quick in such a competitive market, especially where cash flow is so important on a day in day out business. With us, proving out the ROI and backing it up in a performance guarantee, which is essentially the money back guarantee, we're able to really show clear value in the equipment that we incorporate into their process, show positive results, and do it in a very timely manner that fits their business needs. So T0 Pro, yeah, it's a very expensive piece of equipment, but typically we see if they're up there in the plant count and the amount of harvest they do in a year, the majority of our customers, and we have close to 40 of these worldwide, are getting those buybacks relatively soon. In most cases, sometimes less than 2 months.
Wow, that's pretty insane. So buybacks within 2 months. That's really impressive. And I mean, yeah, 40 machines worldwide. Overall, sounds like a pretty fun machine to operate. The fact that you can kind of like plug in the recipes and just let it go after you've really dialed things in, obviously has a huge amount of value.
One thing I didn't mention about that too is just the versatility that we have on problem solving and shortcutting, doing any kind of updates to the software. It's built in with Siemens diagnostics, so we're able to remotely dive into the machine without having to have a rep there. So say you're experiencing an issue on the machine or an update that's needed on the machine. Like I said earlier, we've got close to 40 of these worldwide, some of which are in, opposite time zones around the continent. We're able to do an update remotely without having a rep there, which is really, peace of mind at the end of the day to a lot of these cultivations.
Cool. And just out of curiosity, I used to live in Thailand. I know they're pretty big on the cannabis space now. Do you have any out in Thailand?
Nothing in Thailand right now. From like there are some larger cultivations out there. We've got really good distributor out in the Thailand area too. But T4s we see a bunch in Thailand right now. T2s as well. Keirpucks, those are starting to fly off the shelves in Thailand. But nothing on the T0 level to my knowledge right now in Thailand.
Well, I mean, it's a growing industry out there, so. I don't know if you've been out there recently. Yeah, but when I was out there, I mean, every other business was a cannabis shop. So it was pretty crazy to see the change.
I compare it almost to like Oklahoma back in the day, right? Like they kind of opened up the floodgates when it came to licensing, and it's interesting to see just how big of a pop that market had for us, for sure, right when it came online. And the quality too, like from what I hear, I've not been, but quality is definitely improving. And I know that there were a handful of cultivations I worked with, years ago that are living there right now and cultivating in Thailand.
Sure. So you mentioned the Cure Puck. That's the last product I want to mention on. Then I want to kind of dive in a little bit into maybe your guys' training methodologies and the warranty you guys have and stuff. But just want to touch on the Cure Puck really quick. What exactly is that used for? I mean, what does it even mean to cure? Again, I just want to try to help people who may not fully understand all the different methodologies and strategies people can be using on their plant.
Great question. A product I'm super passionate about. Not a really high price point per unit either. Solves a lot of problems. that people do currently experience when it comes to curing. But essentially, curing has been, I would say, one of those things that a lot of people can screw up on the 1 yard line, right? And we see this across the board. And for the longest period of time, it was cultivating and really, forming the craft of growing. We see that as, a lot of people have gotten really good at growing cannabis over the years, especially since I've been working with Twister in the last 8 years. I've grown into hundreds of thousands of grows since I've worked here, and the improvement just on the cultivation side of things has substantially grown. Curing is still one of those huge problems that we tend to see across the board, like even in really matured states like California, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and even more so in super dry climate states like Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado being a dry state as well. Curing is mostly, the easiest way to explain it when it comes to cannabis is bonding the moisture or the water activity in the flower to make it shelf life longer, right? Better quality. Terpenes play a huge factor into that when it comes to the quality of the flower. You don't want those enzymes burning off and evaporating into the room environment. It's ultimately, sealing the aroma of the flower and preserving the yield or the water activity weight of the flower prior to packaging and getting into the end consumer's hands. The uniqueness and the beauty of the Cure Puck is it automates that process for you. It takes a lot of the second guessing out of burping and in when to burp. It's tracking and monitoring RH, temperature, CO2 and a part per million, and VPD, as well as tracking what the room environment and the temperature is and where you're actually curing it. But essentially, the Cure Puck, you can put this thing on just about anything that you would cure in. It works on black and yellow totes. It works on buckets. It works on C-volts. We even sell custom drums that have a polyurethane lining, a wax lining on there that really have a really tight seal. That has a hose with a pump that essentially will sit on top of the flower in the headspace, which we recommend filling, half to three-fourth way filled. You want a little space in the headspace when you're curing, but it's measuring the CO2 and the RH within that headspace, and you're able to put like sweet spots on the RH temp. So right now on the Gen 1 Cure Pucks, it goes off of RH. On the Gen 2s, it incorporates, the pumping mechanism goes off the VPD, the RH, the temp, and the CO2. So it takes those variables and it knows exactly when to offset the gas. Whereas before, if you talk to anyone that's a legacy grower, it's been growing, cannabis for a number of years. When it comes to like burping or, back when I used to do it with mason jars, you would burp probably 2 or 3 times for the first couple of days and then limit that between, 1 to 12 days, doing it once a day from day 4 to day 10. The Cure Puck's essentially telling you exactly when and why you need to do it. So it's taking away any of the second guessing. The big thing with it on the commercial level is it's maintaining the yield. So in drier states like Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, a good rule of thumb or some math to kind of back this up is for every plus or minus 1% of moisture is 5 grams to a pound. And there's 454 grams to a pound. So if a commercial facility is doing, 200 pounds of harvest, and when they take it into a third party lab to get it tested out, and it's testing at say 8% when they should be testing at like 12, that's a 4 point swing on the moisture percentage. And if they're doing 200 pounds, that's essentially losing anywhere between 3 and 5 pounds due to just water activity, AW, leaving the plant when it shouldn't. A good recommendation just on RH and water activity and how they correlate with one another going into cure, we found that you can get really good cured cannabis at like a 0.63 AW, which is equivalent to a 63 RH environment going into a cure. So after it's been trimmed, or if you're going to do on the branch, curing at the end of the day, we'll pull out the necessary moisture out of that to not run a risk at any kind of a mold problem, but you're not going to run a risk at burning off enzymes, say if it drops below 58, which, is basically going to screw up the nose. It won't get you really, really sticky flower, which is something that a lot of our cultivations look to have with this. And most importantly, from a commercial or a business standpoint, it protects your yield at the end of the day. So you're not losing water weight.
Cool. And I mean, when it comes down to it, I think everyone can agree that yield really is the most important thing you need to focus on. So optimizing for yield is always the move. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, now that we've gone over all your guys' products, and really appreciate you taking the time to explain all of them. I mean, you're obviously a wealth of information when it comes to this stuff. So what I wanted to ask is, these are pretty expensive machines. So what type of warranty return policy do you guys have? And on top of that, like, do you guys offer training? Like, what type of, when someone purchases one of your machines, how to make sure that they're getting the optimal use out of it?
For sure. Yeah. So with us, I'd say we probably have one of the strongest warranties in the market when it comes to post-harvest. It'll vary between machine and machine. Some of our machines, like our T2, come with a 10-year warranty, whereas our T4s, I believe, have a 4-year warranty. Some of our tabletop units and Curepucks and things like that are a lower price point come with a 1-year warranty as well. The good thing about us, and it's kind of a catch 22, really, we make good stuff, right? So it lasts a long time. We have a really strong warranty when it comes to failure on the machines. If it's end user error, that's not really on us, but some people do drop tumblers and we understand that. But that's essentially something that's not going to be covered under a warranty. So I always preach to someone, if they're running any kind of equipment with a tumbler, treat it like a baby. Don't be dropping that thing, because if it gets a dent inward or outward, it can lead to other problems like a chipping of a blade. But, when it comes to engineering and designing our equipment, if it's single piece flow, we use nitrated steel blades. So they're self-sharpening, they have a longer shelf life, very low, relatively maintenance costs to keep the equipment running on hand. We see that constantly with a lot of our commercial producers. That's a main reason why they typically go with us, is because it's a lower cost to run the equipment. Versus a lot of the competitors on the market. We have a 2-ring phone policy. Something's going on, like you're going to talk to a person in 2 rings or less when you call our number. It's not an automated service. We also have incorporated automated case files. So if you email support or if you email orders, you're automatically put in a queue and we get to you just on, when you got in line. So there's never, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of you guys. We take that to heart. Your guys' success is our success at the end of the day.
Cool. And when it comes to training, do you guys offer any like on-site training or video call training, or how does that work?
We do. Yeah, we offer paid on-site training. So we call them ICTs, install commissioning and training for commercial facilities. I always tell people, despite if you're getting a competitor's equipment or our equipment, extraction equipment, whatever it might be, the equipment itself is probably 50% of the equation for success. The other 50% is your SOPs, your process flow, the training on site. We tend to show like 10 times the value add when we're on site working with customers, compared to them just going online and utilizing what videos they can find. That being said, if you guys ever have any questions or need any support, you guys can always call us directly. We also have a huge library of great content when it comes to education. Our marketing has solely been education for the last 2.5 years, not just for trimming, but for curing, for drying. We even have what's called the Nerd's Guide, which I highly recommend downloading if you go to our website. It's essentially like the Bible for, or even the last 2 weeks of bloom, to drying, to trimming, to curing. It has countless of hours and years of education that Jay's found in the cultivation side of things, as well as all of us reps, visiting all the cultivations that we've been into over the course of the years that we've worked in here. The biggest helpful information that I can share is not, I know what works from what I've seen, but I know it doesn't work, right? So we've combined all of those things into the Nerd's Guide, easy access, really good tips. It's very rarely that I share that with anyone that doesn't incorporate at least one thing from the Nerd's Guide into their process. So between the Nerd's Guide and our YouTube channel, which has hundreds of videos and educational tutorials on trimming, on drying, on curing, those are all free to visit on. And then, just our support line, right? If you ever want to call and talk to anyone, a rep, someone in your area, boots on the ground, we're able to do that. We're able to share testimonials if you're on the fence and shopping, maybe for that next trimmer, or if you're looking to get into curing. We definitely set you guys up with other farmers. So it's not just the rep that's, explaining how this is going to benefit your guys' business. You guys can always, talk to any one of our commercial facilities that we partner up with at the end of the day that's having positive results.
Awesome. And yeah, I'd have to agree with you 100%. I think education is always the best marketing. Just teaching people is really helpful. And I'm definitely going to include that Nerd's Guide, a link to that in the description below. So ease of finding it, just click the description below. You should be able to find it. Final question I have for you is just, how are you feeling about the industry right now? I know things got absolutely crazy in 2020 to like 2022. things have slowed down a bit. If someone coming into the space, do you think this is still a good space to get into if you're, not that experienced, if you just want to get into the industry? Like, how are you feeling about it as someone who's been in it for so long?
I would say, I'm still passionate and I still have the same amount of energy and fulfillment of working in the cannabis space as I did as day one. If you're not into solving problems or curveballs, this is definitely not the industry for you. It's definitely going to keep you on the feet, keep you on your feet every day. And if you're into learning new things and being humble and sharing new things with others, the amount of gratitude that you get from doing that is, I've not found it in any other industry that I've worked in, especially being on the plant side of things and in cultivation. There's something unique that just goes with, the cultivating side of the plant and even the business side of post harvest and operating a smooth, efficient business at the end of the day. It's definitely evolved and changed over the course of the 8 years that I've been with Twister and have really been hands-on in the industry. You have a lot of consolidation going on in the market right now. That being said, you have a lot of businesses that are expanding, and they were single state operators and now they're what we call MSOs or multi-state operators. Every state, it's pretty unique in the United States right now, runs their legislation and cultivation count differently from the next. Certain states right now that I think are really positive states to get into that are doing it really well is my home state, Missouri, is doing quite well right now. It's a really thriving market to be in. Any of the East Coast states like New Jersey is popping up. New York's going to be a very promising market. Florida, I'm eager to see what a lot of these newer states will bring to the table when they do implement a medical program like Texas and some other southern states as well. The biggest thing with me is, I thoroughly enjoy working with the people that I get to work with on a daily basis. It's not really a sales gig for me at the end of the day. It's problem solving, right? And I take a lot of enjoyment in solving problems at the end of the day, especially if they're really difficult ones to solve. But, showing clear, concise ROI and working for a company like Twister that manufactures only the best equipment to market and innovates better than anyone in the sector of the business, is thoroughly fun to do on a daily basis. And, I would say if you're interested in getting into the cannabis industry, if it makes you happy, that's my advice, right? Do what makes you happy. And if you're looking to get involved in some way or another, whether it's on the retail side for a dispensary or even on the cultivation side of things, there are a handful of super helpful, useful recruiting companies out there that can easily, get you a job at a lot of companies right now that are hiring in several states.
Cool. Well, it sounds like it's not the easiest industry to have success in, but if you are passionate about what you do, you really want to be a part of it, then success will probably just flow naturally. Luke, I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a super informative interview, and I learned a ton talking to you. I mean, you're obviously like an expert on this stuff to the full extent of the word. So I learned a ton. And just for everyone listening, we do sell all Twister products on greenthumbdepot.com. So reach out to us anytime, and we're happy to help you guys find a solution. So Luke, thank you again so much for your time, and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'd say anyone out there looking to learn a little bit more about our products, www.twistertrimmer.com is our website. If you're on Instagram, my handle is Twister Luke. And then, yeah, Twister Trimmer is our IG handle as well. And YouTube, we have a ton of information on YouTube.